This is the Smart Buildings Academy podcast with Phil Zito, episode 233. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 233 of the Smart Buildings Academy podcast. And in this episode, we are going to be looking at the top 5 areas you should be focusing on in 2021. So in this episode, what I want to get across to you is some key areas that you can focus on from a technical as well as a business and sales perspective to really kind of carry you through 2021. I think just based on a couple signs that I'm seeing in the market, we're going to actually have a fairly tumultuous 2021. I know everyone's kind of optimistic, but I'm not sharing that optimism. And I think if you're properly prepared, you can carry yourself through this pretty well. There are going to be some uptick areas that are definitely going to be really beneficial to your business and to your career. But there's also going to be a lot of kind of downturn areas just based on how our markets performed in past recessions and in past environments. All right, so let's dive into this. So I'm going to focus on kind of the 5 areas that you should focus on. And then I'll probably piggyback on those areas with kind of the counter areas on where you should pull your focus from. So, number 1 on my list, and I've been kind of beating this drum since probably last summer. And if you're listening to this, it is January 2021. So, that was about 6 months ago at the time of this recording. And that area is retrofit sales. You know, there's a couple reasons why I believe retrofit sales are going to be increasingly important in 2021. So the first reason that I think retrofit sales are going to be very important is I have a firm belief that we are going to start to see a reduction in staffing at owner operators companies. I believe that we are right, wrong, or indifferent, we're going to see a lot of the experienced people reduced because they're the most highly paid people. And we're going to see a push for remote service, remote monitoring and management, and really outsourcing of the operations of facilities. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of commercial assets are unoccupied right now. They're not being utilized. And so because of that lack of utilization, what I believe we'll see is kind of, for lack of a better word, a downsizing of staff. And as we see a downsizing of staff, we are going to see that in a lot of these buildings that have legacy systems, the people who make these downsizing decisions often do not understand the talent and makeup of their team. And so I could very well see people who have skill sets that are critical to maintaining legacy systems being let go from these companies. Now, on one hand, if the person being let go was, really entrepreneurial, that could be beneficial to them because they could come right back to that company as a consultant and say, hey, if you need me to maintain your legacy systems, then hire me as your consultant and I will maintain them. But I think we're going to see a fair bit of people who don't do that. And because of that, we're going to see a bunch of legacy systems. And we've got this kind of environment financially right now where cash is pretty cheap. Getting access to capital is pretty low or is pretty easy. As a business owner, I'm constantly getting offers for really low cost, long term capital infusions. It's just so easy to get your hands on cash right now. Now, that being said, that could lead us into situations where companies are having to retrofit their control systems and they're looking at doing maybe gradual retrofits. And so I believe that in the commercial, in the non-institutional market, we are going to see retrofit sales really kind of uptick in the commercial environment. Now, it's going to be a difficult conversation to have because a lot of these companies have no cash flow coming in. So you're probably going to have to run that through the company's operational budget instead of their capital budget. So right now, if you haven't been doing what I've been advising you to do for the past 6 months, right now would be a critical time to get in with facility managers, really understand their control systems, understand their legacy systems, and start helping them plan for retrofits so that if that situation comes to be, then you can go and help them execute that retrofit work. That would be a really important area I'd be focusing on. I think there's going to be a lot of companies that are going to be kind of shocked when construction season comes around and there's not so many plan and spec jobs. There's not so many traditional construction jobs available in the market, and companies that are positioned solely to execute that work are going to find themselves in a world of hurt. So we had this kind of weird thing that could make you feel like there was a lot of construction work, and it was that the economy closed down. No one could go and execute their construction projects. So when construction projects open back up there shortly, kind of in the early fall, everyone was like, oh my gosh, look, the construction market's booming. We've got all this work now. But in actuality, it was just piled up backlog. And what I've been hearing from a lot of companies is that they're not closing new capital projects and they're not refilling that backlog. So they're starting to burn through that backlog, but they're not refilling that pipeline of backlog. And because of that, if they're not shifting towards a more retrofit sales and or services model, at least for, the next 6 to 9 months, they're going to be in trouble. I think we're, as an economy, going to really struggle to figure out reoccupancy. There's so many large companies that have said they are not going to reoccupy until spring/summer of 2022. And what effect that has on the commercial real estate market is still to be determined. But one thing's for sure, those assets still need to be maintained. Just the level of operational talent needed to maintain them, or the tolerance for operational talent, meaning the amount of money people will want to spend on operational talent is probably going to reduce. And when that reduction happens, as I mentioned, you're likely to lose the people who know how to maintain the legacy systems. And when that happens, you are likely going to need a retrofit because you can no longer buy a lot of the parts for those legacy systems. Now, on the flip side, an area I would focus highly on, and this is kind of number 2, is the light commercial warehousing solutions. So kind of light commercial, and actually not even so much light commercial. I would just say light industrial, actually, rather. Light industrial and warehousing. If you read any real estate websites, any real estate blogs, if you track anything, you'll know that any warehousing or light industrial space is like almost fully utilized because a lot of companies had to shift to online businesses. They have to have places to warehouse their equipment. They have to have places to operate manufacturing. And so because of this, there are environmental control solutions required in both of those spaces. Oftentimes when we think of manufacturing, we only think of SCADA systems. We only think of industrial PLCs, but there is an environmental component. And so something we have not traditionally addressed is that light commercial warehousing market. We've traditionally went after real estate, schools, and some government work, right? Well, now it's time for us to rethink how do we approach our sales. And if we're looking for capital projects, those warehousing solutions, they are going to be a good fit. The only problem is our current product lines and our current approach to the market is not a good fit from a price point perspective. We're going to have a much simpler control solution that we can deploy that's affordable and can be deployed with low cost labor. So that is one area that I would challenge you all to think about is how am I approaching the warehousing and light industrial space? What solutions could I bring to that? Most of the OEMs out there have a version of a light commercial, light industrial solution that can be brought to market, but most of you probably don't have it in your line card. So think about how you could add that to your line card and how you could use that to potentially expand your portfolio of business. A huge thing that's coming up that I don't see a lot of people talking about, and I think properly positioned, it's going to be a huge market or market opportunity. Yeah, that's the right word. Is the Niagara AX end of life. I haven't seen anything saying it's changed. So far, it's still on for summer of 2021. And that is that the AX product line is getting end of lifed. Now, that means that N4 is going to be the new product line. I mean, it already is the new product line, but it's going to be what's going forward. So you're going to have end of life. I don't know exactly how they're going to support large corporations. I'm looking to have some folks from Niagara on the podcast in the very near future to discuss this, because I think this is, with the market share that they have, just from a macro perspective, this is a really big deal. Properly positioned, I've actually talked to several entrepreneurs who have kind of struggled through I don't want to say recession, but basically it was through the forced shutdown of our economy, and they've really struggled to kind of find their fit. And they've been like, what do I do? And one of the things I've been saying is you should really be looking at the AX retrofits, whether you retrofit it to N4 or you retrofit it to some other control system. It's still an opportunity. It is actually something. One of the challenges with retrofits is actually having a viable message to get in the door around. So one of them, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is legacy, right? You have legacy product can no longer be bought. You're putting your facility at risk. That's a talk track. Another talk track is around the indoor air quality, although most folks are just sticking in ionization and filterization and calling it a day. I thought we would see a lot more analytics. I really thought we would see folks implementing analytics and a lot of airflow control strategies based on ASHRAE's recommendations, and they would do that under the guise of preventing class action lawsuits. I haven't seen that come to fruition. I was kind of surprised by that. It may still happen that folks go and implement analytics and data logging. That way, if they get sued, they can go and refer back to the data and say, hey, we've done our duty around maintaining these assets, and here's the data to validate it. I'm not sure if that will happen. I still think it's an opportunity, and we'll talk about that a little later in the podcast. But so you got those two talk tracks, right? And the third talk track is this AX talk track. You can go and find a site that has AX, and you have a viable reason to get in there and talk about an end-of-life retrofit, about upgrading those assets. So that could be a talk track to get you into a retrofit sale, and you could do a phased approach. I think that is an area that you really should focus on if you're running a small to mid-sized company. If you carry the Niagara product line, you should definitely focus on that. But even if you don't carry the Niagara product line, that is an opportunity in the market for you to go and actually enter dialogues with customers and talk about potential retrofit solutions. Remote operations is a huge market opportunity, and I see a couple leading companies, folks who are working with us from a training perspective, who are building out their own remote operations centers. And I'm not going to name those companies. That's their own personal strategies, but they are going about it in the right way. They're creating solutions that are either an amalgamation of other products, or they're creating their own solutions, but they are going and looking at essentially offsetting. And this is an area that's really interested me for the longest time, which was kind of that managed service provider approach to controls. We saw where IT really in the 80s and 90s switched to a managed service provider environment. And it really, despite what your experience may be with a managed service provider from an IT perspective, it has improved the IT environment, in my opinion. It's brought competition. It has really enabled customers who maybe need like part-time operations to be able to maintain their IT assets. Well, I think the same can happen with building automation. And I believe we'll see that through both reactive as well as proactive remote operations. From a reactive perspective, this will be things like going and watching systems and then reacting to those system changes, reacting to alarms, and guiding people through, whether that is through on-site support or if that's just as a first line of triage for customers. Then we have the more proactive approach to remote operations, which is analytics and going and modifying set points for optimum use of energy or equipment performance or IAQ performance. So I believe remote operations is an approach, and this is something I've written about as well as talked about in past podcasts, is the remote operations approach from contractors. If you are a contractor, if you're an integrator, I highly suggest you look at a services model. Even if that's only a small portion of your revenue, I would highly, highly encourage you to at least get to 10% of your revenue being some form of services. And when I say services, I'm talking about software services. This is something that is not product or staff dependent. So it's not, well, it's kind of staff dependent. It's not dependent on a product, like it's not dependent on you providing a product, and it's not dependent on your staff necessarily being out at site. Yeah, your staff may manage the service, but in an ideal situation, you would have a service that does analytics or energy management or work order management or whatever, and you would provide that service to your customers, and that would become predictable revenue. And the more you can get predictable revenue in your business, the better you can make capital planning decisions, the better you can make investment decisions, growth decisions, etc. I know that this has been a very business-focused podcast so far. Some of you who are technicians and programmers, you may be like, okay, how does this apply to me? When I talk about these things, like you can make better business decisions, investment decisions, growth decisions, etc., I always want you to think about what is your role in this. It's totally fine if you want to be a technician for your whole life, if you want to be a programmer for your whole life. There are plenty of people who are making six figures doing that. It's not a bad thing. It's admirable. But you really, to be top tier, you need to understand your impact to the business. So if you go and influence customers to use analytics, how does that impact the ability of your business to potentially identify faults, which then can turn into service tickets and retrofit work? I was on one of the Facebook groups the other day, and this guy was saying how his company had no work for him from a service perspective, and he was benched. And everyone's like, leave the company, ditch them, da-da-da, it's their job to blah, blah, blah. I'm like thinking to myself, no, where's the personal responsibility in this? Okay, I get it. You work for a company and, you just want to be a tech and be out there doing tech work and call it a day. But at the end of the day, you should think about, how am I going to get my next job? How am I going to get my next project? You're not just there to mount a controller. Think about, how can I potentially add value? And that thought process of how can I add value and growing that maybe into an analytics solution or into a retrofit or into some sort of consulting, whatever it is, that is going to create work that you can then execute that is going to carry you through. I'm a firm believer that whether you're on construction or you are on service side, you should always be thinking about, how can I create work for me to execute? That way you always have some work to do, even when things start to dry up. Okay, so that's kind of brief segue off of remote operations. And then finally, analytics. I still think analytics are valuable. I think they are going to continue to be valuable. You'll notice I did not bring up digital twins. You'll notice I did not bring up any of the Azure or AWS suite of solutions from an IoT perspective. I know there's a ton of people pushing out that digital twins is like the buzzword right now. There's plenty of other podcasts talking about that. I don't think it is a viable market opportunity for 2021. If I have a customer who is barely able to make their ends meet and is not able to get cash from their tenants and is struggling to make strategy decisions, and I'm thinking of technology solutions that are going to impact their business right now, those technologies don't even begin to cross my mind. And I hesitate to say this because it's going to come off really, really strong and probably piss a lot of people off. But, really shame on people who are bringing up those solutions for their customers right now. That is not in your customer's best interest. I'm like getting goosebumps talking about this because I know that I'm going to piss a lot of people off. And some of the people who, I'm actually friends with who propose this stuff, but it's just not the right solution for people right now. It's just not. These folks are struggling to keep cash flow in their businesses. They're struggling to make the right business decisions. They don't need digital twins. They don't need all of these IoT solutions. They just don't need them. Yes. Are they sexy? Yes. Do they work? Yeah, definitely. Are they applicable to some business use cases? Absolutely. Are they applicable right now? Like, are they the thing that's going to make the most of a difference? No, no. The things that are going to make the most difference right now are helping people manage their operations, reduce their operational costs. And you can do that through either upgrading systems to make them easier to work with, going and doing remote operations and doing like part-time operations, doing some site audits and maybe doing some minor retrofits to control set points and sequences, doing analytics to avoid faults and failures. Those are all things that are going to benefit owner operators right now that I would be focused on. Now, from a contractor perspective, I'd be focused on, that light industrial warehousing. I think that's a very untapped market right now. Probably not going to be the same margin percentages you're working with right now, but I still think it's going to be viable from a controls installation perspective. I'd definitely be focusing on retrofit. That AX thing has some real legs. I'd look at that. And then I would also think about my remote operations and analytics kind of as the bookend of that approach and strategy. So I'd be very interested in what you think people should be focusing on in 2021. So wherever the comment section is, whether you're watching this on YouTube, listening to it on your podcast, at our site, on LinkedIn, wherever, comment, let me know. What do you think people should focus on in 2021? Be very interested. I provided my thoughts. I provided my stuff. For those of you out there who disagree with me, please disagree. I encourage that. For those of you who agree with me, why do you agree with me? I'd like to know. I encourage you to continue to challenge and grow and develop yourself. If you're looking for training to develop yourself and your team in 2021, really encourage you to check out our product lines. You can find out more about all of our offerings at our site at podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/233. Once again, that's podcast.smartbuildingsacademy.com/233. I'd encourage you, if you run a team, to check out our skill assessment, see where your team's at right now and how you can improve your team moving into 2021. So next week, we'll get back to the technical topics, but I just wanted to discuss kind of some trends that I see going on. Everyone seems to be focused on all the sexy technology. I want to focus on stuff that I think is more real and actually applicable to you and is going to make a difference to your business. Hopefully you agree with me, and I look forward to seeing you and talking to you next week. Thanks a ton. Take care.